Hello my friends, and a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video we are going to be painting a special and a rather different miniature. So this one is a 3D printed miniature that I picked up from a company called We Print Miniatures. And this is a 3D print of Cloud Strife from the Final Fantasy VII video game. So this is a 3D print that I've managed to pick up, and it is a fantastic, really well detailed miniature that I'm really going to enjoy bringing to life for you here in the video. Now, as always, you're more than welcome to join along and paint with me, but if not, you can always just sit back and chill out and enjoy while I paint some of these little models. So with this one, we're going to start as always with the skin, and I'm going to start with the bellow setup, and we're going to go with the beige red as a nice base. This is a perfect base. It has a really good color, has a nice little pinky reddy sort of tone to it, and it's a dark enough color that creates a great base tone. From there then we will be able to pick up those colors and brighten this up as we go. Now, looking into a lot of the pictures, and of course having Cloud's image sort of burnt into my brain from playing the game from years and years and years and years and years and years ago. It's always one of my favorite games growing up. We're going to move on and paint the trousers and the vest, I suppose you could say. And for this we're going to use a nice purple from, we're going to be using the scale 75 purple. And this is a really good tone as well. So again, this is a really great base color. This is something that we're going to tone down quite a bit with black, and then bring and boost these vibrant points out where the folds are. So this is going to create a real good depth of the character. And what we're going to do is we're going to be as careful as possible when placing these colors on, so that we don't get those onto the skin at all. Again, painting in just the base colors, you can be a little bit rougher, and it doesn't matter too much if you do make some little mistakes, because you can always go back and fix them before you sort of apply the washes and build the colors back up. So don't be too worried if you do make a mistake, because it's easily fixed. From there, we're going to move on and we're going to paint the hair. Now, we're going to use the Citadel color, the Avalanche Sunset, for this one. Now, if you've watched my channel and you saw me paint in Bomber Dribblesnot, the Blood Bowl Goblin, then you'll see that I'm going to use a very similar sort of technique to paint the hair on this character. And we're going to start with this Avalanche Sunset, because this is a really good, again, really decent sort of thickness to the paint. So this one takes to the model quite quickly. It's a great base color, and as we build these colors back up, we're going to get this really cool looking kind of Super Saiyan-esque kind of hair out of this character, which is going to look really, really cool on the finished piece as well. So again, I'm just going to be as careful as possible not to get this on the skin, but again, don't worry too much, because if you do make a mistake, it is quite easily fixed. From there, I'm going to move on to using Tenebrous Grey from AK Interactive. This is just a very, very dark grey. It's one of my favourite colours because it takes to the model really, really well. But if you prefer, you can use black of any kind. With this one, I'm going to paint all of the metals with this one, because we're going to get a little bit creative, and we're going to get a little bit brave in this model. We're going to paint this one using a non-metallic metal steel type of effect. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time towards the end of the video showing you sort of how I've created that effect on this model. So all of the metals we're going to paint in this Tenebrous Grey, in this really dark sort of black colour. And then we're going to base all of the leathers using my favourite Dark Rust 302. So again, a nice dark, really good sort of coverage paint. This one goes onto the model really, really well. And this is going to give us the perfect dark brown base colour to then build up those leathers and get these colours to really shine through and really pop on the model as well. You can already see that some of these base colours, so the purple, the hair, the skin, you can already see Cloud come into life. So this is starting to have the effect already. And I've got to be honest with you, painting this guy has been a crazy nostalgia trip for me. So I know that they made like the more up-to-date version of the video game, but part of the fun for me in painting a lot of these old models, or a lot of these models from things like video games, is painting the older versions of them, so I get the nostalgia side of it, because I absolutely love bringing some of these models to life from video games that I played so many years ago with characters that I really, really enjoyed. Now, this particular model was actually sent to me by a very, very good friend of mine, Chris, and he sent this to me as an early birthday present because Cloud is actually his favourite character from a video game of all times. So he wanted to see how I would paint this. So Chris, if you're watching, this one is for you, bud. Pretty much, I'm just going to have a real great fun time building this one up. I really hope that you enjoy what I do with it. So we're moving back onto the scale 75, and we're going to use this really dark, luscious red just around the handle here. And again, this is just a base color, so we're going to build this back up later. But this dark red has this really great effect of standing off the model, and partly because by using all of these sort of purples and yellows and all of these different colors, that red just really pops and just looks that little bit different. We're also then going to use a nice light grey colour just around some of these edges and around some of these areas on the shoes and on the boots. So we're just going to pick out some of these parts to the boots, the folds, and the little bit around the zip area as well. And again, that's just breaking the tone between sort of the dark brown of the boots and then this lighter sort of lip and sort of fold on the boots as well. Now, once all of those base colours are done, and at this stage we've done all of the base colours, we're going to move on to the washes. And we're going to start with the flesh wash. So the flesh wash is from the Army Painter, and if you prefer and you're a Citadel user, you can use Raglan Flesh Shade, and this will do the exact same thing for you. They're very, very similar washes. There's not a great deal of difference between them. It is pretty much just about personal choice. For me, I really enjoy using the Army Painter washes. They tend to do everything that I want them to, so I tend to use these quite a lot. And what I'm going to do with this wash, I'm going to cover the face, but I'm also going to cover the hair as well. And the idea behind using these washes is simple. The wash is a slightly darker tone to what you're already using, and they're very, very watery, so they're very, very watered down, as you can see. And the idea is that these areas and this wash, this darker colour and this darker tone, will dry down in the recessed points, so in the folds of your model, and that will allow you then to build the colour back up and create an element of depth. From there, once that is dry, we're going to use dark tone then on the rest of the model. Again, dark tone is literally just a black wash, so you could use Null Nile if you prefer, and if you're a Citadel user. And again, that's all I'm going to do is just cover all of those areas now using this dark tone, this black wash. So we're going to cover the areas of purple, the red handle, the leathers. We're also going to cover over the boots and the leathers on the gloves as well. The good thing with washes, you don't really have to be overly careful or too cautious with them. But what I would suggest is trying to make sure that they don't pool too much in certain areas. So you don't want a really, really large amount of a wash sat in certain areas of the model, because this will take away some of the detail of the model, and you can end up with too much sort of darkness and shade in certain areas. So we're going to try to avoid that by manipulating the shade into the around the model as much as we can. Now, once all of your shades and all of your washes are dry, you're gonna then want to start to build those colors back up. Now, I normally like to start with the skin, because normally the skin can be quite difficult to get into, so it's always great to start with the skin because we can build up that vibrance from there, and then we can always move on to some of the easier, bigger areas a little bit later. So what we're going to do first is using that beige red, we're just going to go back into the model, and we're going to start to pick out all of those muscles and all of that muscle definition. As you can see with the paint, it is nice and thin, so I've thinned this down with a little bit of water just to get the paint to the consistency of almost about milk, so kind of a milky consistency, so it's not quite watery and it's not too thick, just sort of in between. The more you practice with watering your paints down, the more accustomed to it you become, and the more comfortable you become doing it. So yeah, just using a little bit of a watered down paint, and as you can see, I'm just slowly building these tones and these colors back up on the skin. The perfect way to do this is to paint this around the face, as you can see, around the nose, the mouth and things like that, but painting this on the raised areas while leaving the shade dried in those little recessed points. Now, once we've done that, we're going to use the beige red and basic skin tone. This is going to be our first step up in the highlighting, and again, using a nice thin paint, this is going to give us the perfect blend to go the first step up in that highlight. So we're going to become a little bit more specific on where we place our paint from here on out. So as you can see, I'm now starting to pick out some of the areas where I think the light is going to be catching on those muscles. So I'm just going to pick out some of the shoulder areas, the nose, the cheekbones, around the mouth and the chin, things like that. And this is where we're going to start to boost that lightness and that vibrance, and we're going to start to get a little bit of a lighter color and a lighter tone in this skin. Now, by placing these skin tones on with a thinner paint, what you're going to find is it'll take a little bit longer to dry, but it will allow the paint to dry in a more natural, subtle way. So the color will blend into the color below, allowing those colors to have a really nice, more natural sort of transition into the highlighted points. And the whole idea by that is so that we don't end up with these really big sort of blobs of highlights just dotted around the miniature. It's just about creating that really nice smooth transition in this highlighting. Now, once we've done that first stage, we're going to go on to the second stage and just use the basic skin tone on its own. And again, with this one, as you can see, just trying to be a little bit more careful about where we place this one, because again, we're now controlling where that light source is and where we want the vibrance and the highlighting to be. So again, just around the cheeks, the chin, across the muscles, and all of the muscle definition in the arms. That's one great thing about this 3D print, is the muscle definition and the tone and the character that we've got through this is really, really detailed. It's a really great model, so it looks amazing. As I said, this is a pure nostalgia trip for me. I really love how this model looks and feels exactly like the character from the video game, and it's really great to see it sort of grow and progress and become that character that we all know. So again, I'm just being as careful as possible, using the tip of my brush, using these highlights just across the fingers and things like that as well. Now for that, I'm going to stop at that stage with the skin. You could always push it a little bit further should you want, but I think that is quite okay for Cloud at the moment. Now what I'm going to do from there is I'm going to go straight into painting the hair as well, and we're going to go back with that base colour, so we're going to start using that Avalon Sunset. And as you can see now, I'm going to do the same thing as what we've just done with the skin, and we're going to pick out all of that hair. So we're going to start by building, using the very, very tip of the brush, building up a lot of the colour and a lot of the tone back through the model, just like so. I'm going to be as careful as possible to use the very, very tip of the brush just to pick out all of those different strands. Now normally with hair, I will say to people, you can dry brush the hair should you want to. That's completely fine. They're your models. As I always say, you can paint them however you like. Personally, I do like picking out as much hair as I can using the very tip of the brush, purely because it creates a really, really great focal point on your miniature. People will notice and see that you've spent the time painting all of those strands and painting all of the hair by hand, and it actually stands out on the model and makes that model really, really unique, and it makes it your own. It normally makes the model look a lot more professional and a lot more finished. You can really tell that you spent time painting it by doing it this way. And as you can see, using that watered down paint, that's blending beautifully into the base colour below and giving us that ability to step this up in stages without going too extreme, as I normally say. So once that's done and once that's dry, we're then going to do the same thing, but we're just going to use deep yellow from Vallejo. So that's all I'm going to do again now, is just using the very tip of the brush, just by picking out some more of those strands. Now with deep yellow, this is quite a thin paint, so this one doesn't require too much water to thin this one down, and if you do thin it down too much, it does require multiple coats to get the vibrancy and the consistency that you want. But that's cool as well, because that does teach you a little bit of patience, and it does give you the opportunity to build those layers up for that vibrancy, which is a great way of learning how to build vibrancy through multiple layers without, as I say, just leaving sort of a big blob on the model. Again, I'm trying to use the tip of the brush as much as I can. I'm trying not to overload the brush with paint as well. That's something that can happen if you have a paint like this yellow that is a little bit thinner or takes a few coats. It is a mistake to overload that brush because you're kind of trying to compensate from the fact that the paint is quite thin, and then you can make mistakes by leaving big blobs and not getting that transition as nice. So what we're also going to do then, we're just going to mix a 50-50 split. So whenever I mix my paints, I always like the first transition, or the majority of the transitions, to be 50-50, so half and half, because that gives them the most natural and most normal sort of way of building those colours back up. And we're going to use that deep yellow, but we're going to also use a pastel yellow from AK Interactive. Now the pastel yellow is a fantastic colour because this has a really nice sort of light, almost like whitey yellow, chalky yellow kind of effect to it. And as we pick out the very edges of the hair, this is what's going to give our hair that real edge highlight. This is going to make our hair really, really stand out on the model and look the part. This is how we're going to get this to really look amazing. And this is the layer that is really going to allow that hair to pop and stand out. So once that's done, we're going to move back onto Elden Dill Violet. That was the colour that I was thinking of earlier. So this is the purple from Scale 75. Scale 75 are a great paint set. They love naming their paints awkward names. So this is the violet colour from Scale 75, and we're just going to go back and repaint some of the purples now while leaving the black wash in the recesses. So as you can see with Cloud's vest here, we've got a lot of details and a lot of lines poking down through the model. So we're going to use the tip of the brush like we've done with the hair, and we're just going to pick out all of those different bits individually. Again, you could dry brush this if you wanted to, but again, I do feel that by spending a little bit extra time by painting these things individually, it really does show through on the finished article, and the finished piece will benefit from it because you will be a lot more proud of the effort and the work that you've put into getting the model to look just like the original character. So yeah, just painting this up around the trousers as well. As you can see, I'm kind of following the lines, following the dynamism of the model, so following the folds of the clothes and things like that, while leaving that black wash sitting in those folds and in those creases. And we're going to build that vibrancy in a few layers, again using that nice thin down paint, as you can see, so that it blends those colours together and builds that vibrancy in some great natural stages, just like so. From there, then, I'm going to mix two colours together. So we're going to go with Scale 75 with that Elden Dill Violet, and then we're also going to use Alien Purple from the Army Painter as well. Now, the Alien Purple in this now is going to give this a really nice subtle highlight and a really nice subtle boost to that vibrancy. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to start to pick out where that light source is going to be. So just across the chest, on those areas that we've been painting where you can see all of those different individual strands on the vest, we're going to focus mostly just around the chest area in the middle, and that's going to allow us to create that illusion that there's a little bit of shadow just across the top by the neck piece, and then it's also going to give us the ability to create a little bit of shadow just lower by the belt area and just around the back as well, because we're going to paint mostly and keep the light to the front but not do so much on the back, which allows us then to kind of give us that light source on the front and also create a shadow from the sword, that big buster sword on the back as well, which is a really fantastic, quick and easy little way of building this character up as well. Now you can already see the effect that this nice tone is having on the trousers. You can see already that vibrance starting to show through as well. So what I'm doing here is, as I said, the original highlight was 50% of each. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another drop of Alien Purple into this. So first things first, the first highlight was 1 drop of violet, 1 drop of purple. Now this is 1 drop of violet, 2 drops of purple. So this is creating the next highlight up. So we're still keeping that violet base color in there as well. We're just keeping a little bit of that and not going too extreme just yet, again because we don't want to overextend our highlights just yet. We want to kind of get that smooth transition first. So as you can see, this is really starting to pop on the trousers and on the front of that vest as well. You can really see the effect that this Alien Purple is starting to have. The cool thing is, all of that black wash that we've got sitting in all of those creases is really kind of giving this model that contrast between that dark purple that we painted originally and now this highlight that's starting to build through as well. You can really see this starting to create and have such a big effect on the model already, and this is going to look great when it's all done. So from there, as a final stage, I'm just going to use Alien Purple on its own, and again using a nice thin down paint, and I'm just going to be very specific about where I place this. We're going to focus just around that chest area again, as you can see, just using the very tip of my brush as well, just trying to pick out those details just across the front of this vest, and again just across the front of these creases on the trousers as well, just around the midriff and around the groin area, and then around some of those bigger creases just a little bit further down. Now we can be really targeted with this, and we can pick out maybe just a few bits across the top and leave the bottom with the slightly darker purple, and that again gives us control as to where the light source is going to be on the model and how that how the vibrancy and the contrast of the paint is showing off in that light as well. Once all of that is done, we're going to move on to doing the leathers. If you've watched any of my other videos before, you'll know how I'm doing my leathers. So I'm going to use Leather Brown from the AK Interactive range. This is a really cool, tried and tested, quick, simple and amazing looking way of painting leathers. So it's just basically painting the leathers using this Leather Brown from AK Interactive, and that's all I'm going to do, again using that very tip of the brush. On the belt itself, so the main belt buckle itself, I'm going to try to be as careful as possible and pick out as many of those details as I can, or I'm going to pick out the details as best as I can. Again, should you want to, dry brushing this is absolutely fine. That is completely up to you. Personally, again, I would much rather just spend a little bit extra time and really show off those skills and get this model painted up to the best that we can, because we really want this one to look awesome on our shelves. So I'm going to paint the boots as well using the same technique and using the same color, and I'm just going to paint this just around, leaving the wash, leaving that black shade just in any of the folds and in any of the details. As you can see, the separation between the heel of the boot and of course the toe cap of the boot as well. Just like so, just being as careful as possible, using the very tip of the brush. Nice thin down paint as well, so it's smooth transition onto the model. And from there we're going to use the Leather Brown and the Deep Brown, and again it's 50-50, so just one blob of each, perfectly matched mix, and then we're going to paint this just up on top again. So this is now already starting to build that vibrancy. Now painting this kind of leather technique is really great for painting sort of orangey kind of leathers, because there are a lot of different types of color techniques that you can use for leathers. If you're looking for a way of painting oranges and orange style leathers, this is a really great way of doing it. It does look amazing on models, and it really does pop when it dries as well. Again, as you can see, I'm using the very tip of my brush just to be as careful as possible, just to pick out all of those details across the front. Now I'm hoping to paint quite a few different models from this range. You'll have to let me know if you've enjoyed this video and if you like this particular painting. You'll have to also let me know if you played the original game and if I've done justice to the original character as well. And you have to let me know if you guys have had just as many hours and hours of fun as I did playing on the original game, and whether or not you still play now as well. So once we've done the first highlight, we're then going to use Deep Brown on its own for the next highlight. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to use the very tip of the brush, and I'm just going to use kind of like a stippling, dabbing motion just across some of the leathers. It doesn't matter with this leather technique if some of the colours below show through, because that adds to the worn out sort of scratchy and broken down effect with the leathers, which is exactly what we're looking for. Leather shouldn't be perfect. It should have a little bit of a tarnish and a little bit of an organic sort of feel to it, you know. So that's kind of what we're looking for. So yeah, you'll have to let me know if you think, if you'd like to see more of the Final Fantasy range, if you'd like to see me paint more 3D models. I'm enjoying doing a few different video game adaptations at the moment. As you know, I do quite a few of the Resident Evil 2 ones, and I absolutely love the nostalgia of painting some of these game models. So yeah, like I say, let me know in the comments if you'd enjoy to see more of this sort of thing. Like I say, just using that stippling motion now just across those leathers, across the sort of gloves here, and across the belt area as well. And once all that is done, we're going to move on to use Dirty Red, and I absolutely love the name of Dirty Red. And that's all I'm doing is using a very small dry brush, and I'm going to gently dry brush around the handle. And I'm not going to dry brush the bottom of it. I'm going to leave the bottom or the underneath of it a little bit darker. I'm just going to dry brush this, as you can see, in a downward motion from the top. And I'm gently going to build that up in a couple of different layers again as well. And I'm just going to be more careful to keep that just across the top area to create that illusion of light source. As a purely optional stage, you can always add a very small amount of medium orange to your leathers as well, as you see I'm doing here. So this time I'm using a very watered down version of this paint, and I'm being very selective about where I place this, just as an element of highlighting some of those leathers. So as I said, this is a cool way of painting these kind of orangey kind of leathers. This is almost like the icing on the cake. So this is the area where it's an optional stage. You don't have to do this, but if you do, it just adds that little bit of a pop, that little bit of a subtle sort of contrast boost on certain parts, and it really does sort of catch your eye on the finished piece as well. It looks great, so it is worth spending the time to just sit down and add this little bit on extra. From there then we're going to go back to the Miskatonic Grey from Scale 75. And with this, I'm just going to paint around the lips and the tongue of the boots. So as you can see, I'm just using that stippling motion again, and using that stippling motion with a nice thin paint. The cool thing with these scale 75 paints is they thin down absolutely beautifully. So they dry down and they thin down in this really, really lovely sort of texture, which allows you to build up on top really, really nicely. They always have this great way of blending the coat from below into the coat from above, into the coat that you place on top. So it gives you this really nice smooth transition, something that's pleasing on the eye. So once that bit is dry, I'm going to mix the Miskatonic Grey with Silver Grey from AK Interactive, mixing these paints together again, and I'm going to use 50% of each again, and I'm just going to pick out some of the very, very edges with this one. And again, I'm using a small detail brush for this, so this is my size 0 or my 5/0, you know, my very, very small dry brush, my very, very small detail brush, sorry. And again, using that stippling motion just to create a little bit more of an organic feel and a hand-painted feel to this, so it doesn't look too manufactured. Just dabbing this along some of the real edges, just to create that little bit of a vibrance boost again. Now, my friends, from here we are going to spend a little bit of time doing the non-metallic metals. This is going to take a little bit of time, but it is going to be worth it, because by the end this is going to look fantastic. It is a long-winded affair, so I do apologize in advance, but stick with me, it is worth it. So first things first, we're going to water down Anthracite Grey from AK Interactive. We're going to water this down quite a bit so that this becomes a really thin glaze, and we're just going to cover a lot of the darker areas with this color. So as you can see, I'm covering pretty much the majority of the metal, and the reason why we're using this bluish color, this sort of blue-gray tone, is because it's going to give this a kind of cold steel kind of look in the end. So ideally, when you're painting these non-metallics, you don't want everything to just be plain grey. You want these blue tones and blue colours to show through, because that is what creates the illusion that there's a color temperature, that it means that the metal is cold like steel. You know, you don't want it all to be too vibrant, too grey, too flat, because that then will take away from the illusion of the temperature of the model. So yeah, we're going to cover the metals in that, and then we're going to move on to using ash grey. Now with the ash grey, I'm using a thin down version again, and this time I'm using a less detailed brush, and that's all I'm doing is using a stippling motion across the top of that blue. And the reason why I'm using a stippling motion is because I kind of want this to dry down, but I don't mind if the underneath colours of that blue then show through. And by using such a thin paint, this is going to give some of that lighter, some of that blue colour, that blue tone underneath, the opportunity to show through as well as we paint in. Because if you place a thick coat on top, then you'll lose the ability to get that blue tone and that sort of cool temperature in the model. So this is why I'm painting using such thin tones. It also gives me the opportunity, when you're painting with thin tones, to use multiple layers, but not lose the detail. Okay, so if you place in thick layers, the thicker the layer, the less detail you get on your model. Whereas when you're using these thin layers, you can boost and use multiple layers, and you're not losing that detail. So once I've used that ash grey, I'm then going to use ash grey, and I'm going to use graphite mixed. So again, this is 50-50, so this is half of each. And this time I'm going to focus this on the top edge of the Buster Sword. So we're going to pick out the big bladed area, as you can see. The underneath part, where we've done the blue and then the ash grey, we're going to leave that as it is for now, because we're going to build this in a different way. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a two-tone effect out of this Buster Sword. So we're going to have a lighter area on top, and then a darker area down the bottom. But at the same time, I'm also going to place some of this colour across the shoulder pad and the wrist guards, and also the hilt of the sword and things like that, just to kind of mimic and manipulate where I think the light source is going to be on the model. So I'm just going to kind of create an area where I want this lighter area and these lighter greys to create the light shining onto the metals. So as you can see, I'm not being overly careful or cautious, not being particularly precious about where or how I'm placing this, because these coats are so thin. This is going to give me a great opportunity to build up a lot of character and a lot of texture and a lot of detail from it. So So once that's dry, then we're just going to use graphite on its own. So as you can see, we've done the ash grey graphite mix, and now we're just going to use graphite on its own. And now we're switching brushes now to be a little bit more detailed. So I'm using a much thinner, more detailed brush. And with this now, I'm going to use two different techniques. Firstly, across the edge of the Buster Sword, I'm going to use a scraping technique. So that's all I'm going to do is just quickly make a sketching kind of effect. So that's all I'm doing is dragging the brush down the model in straight lines. And this is creating the illusion or the element of texture in a sense of it's going to make the blade look like there's lots and lots and lots of tiny scratches, or as if the blade has been sharpened quite a lot. So this is going to make the edge of the blade look sharp, but it's also lighter the more we've been painting as well. So this is the next highlight stage. The cool thing is you don't have to be perfect with this, because it again wants to look a little bit more organic. We kind of wanted to make it look a little bit less manufactured and industrial, and a little bit more sort of well worn, well used, worn out, scratched, scraped, battered, worn, you know, these types of things. Then with the stippling effect across the top of the sword, as you can see, I'm using the stippling effect then just to place patches of this graphite, again in areas where I think the light source is going to be catching on the model. So you can see I'm doing the same thing just across the shoulder pad, the pauldron, and again across the wrist guard on both hands. So the stippling effect, again, this is cool because it's leaving some of the colour and some of the tone from below, as well as some of the colour and some of the texture from the highlighting colour. And this is perfect because, again, we don't want everything to look perfect. We kind of want these things to be scratched, scraped, battered, worn, beaten. We want things to look a little bit more well used, you know, worn out. We don't want everything to look pristine and brand new. So as you can see, I'm just trying to pick out as much of those detailed areas as I can. Stippling motions, scraping motions, it doesn't matter too much because we're kind of creating that effect anyway. Now, using the same colour, so using that graphite, what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to use the very, very, very tip of my fine detail brush, and this is how we're going to make a lot of these scrapes on the sword. And I'm just going to freehand, as you can see, a few just random natural scratches all up the main part, the bottom part of this Buster Sword, and these are going to dry down really, really well. And as we highlight areas later, these are going to tie into the model really, really well. At the moment, they almost look a little bit too bright, but as we brighten other areas up, these are going to gel and melt down into and meld down into the model really, really well. Not just am I using scratches, as you can see, I'm also using the very tip of the brush to just create little dabs and dots here and there, almost like little chips and little worn out patches and areas where things don't look perfect, everything's not pristine. So you can see where I've made those scratches on the blade, and you can see I'm just dabbing the very tip of the brush now. And again, this is a nice thin paint, so it's gonna dry into that darker colour really, really naturally. It's not gonna look too bright or too overdone. So yeah, you can see some of the areas just around the circles here, we're making these really scratched and scraped. And that's perfect. That's kind of where we want it. So as I said, we're going to highlight as well. So we're going to go with the graphite, and this time I'm going to add Miskatonic Grey to it. And again, this is half and half. So just one blob of each paint. So 50% of one, 50% of the other. And this time we're going to be a little bit more specific about where we place this. So we're going to place this across the top edges where we think the light source is going to be, and things like that. And as you can see, the more layers that we're adding into this, the more this is starting to tone up, the more the highlighting is starting to pick out some of those areas on the model. So we're starting to see just across the very top of the hilt of the Buster Sword, we're starting to get a lighter tone and a much, much brighter effect as well. With this combination, we're also going to go back down the main blade with these scrapes and scratches. And again, that's going to create that element of it looking a lot sharper and a lot more rough and worn out and well used as well. Again, you don't have to be perfectly, you don't have to be perfectly accurate with how straight these lines are or anything like that. This is all freehand, and the freehand side of it is what's going to make it look really, really cool. It's what's going to add a lot more character to this model as well. So yeah, we can just keep on building. With this combination as well, I'm also going to add just a few little extra scratches just for depth, because we've got a few scratches there in the grey colour. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a few with the grey highlight colour as well, and this is going to add a little bit extra depth to the model. So we've got some darker scrapes and scratches, almost creating, some of them are older, some of them are newer, kind of giving you that depth and the story behind how well used the sword is as well. And again, just picking out where that light source is, just across the shoulder pad here. Here we go, just like so. Just trying to be as careful as possible. Not to overdo this on all of those details, but to just try to pick out some of the details. And again, you don't have to be particularly perfect with this. This isn't like an art form that is exact, you know. This is something that you can pick up and just toy with and play about with, and see sort of how the light source reacts and how these colors blend together as they dry down. You can really play about with this. So we're going to use that Miskatonic Grey on its own this time, and again you can see I'm now starting to be really specific about where we are building these layers. The cool thing with this is the more layers you add to this kind of effect, the more depth you get out of it. So you can kind of do this in 3 layers, but when you start doing it in sort of like 5, 6, 7 different layers, you kind of really get this element of real depth. It looks a lot more natural and a lot more sort of fluid on the eye. This is exactly what you want for a display piece or something that we want to build up in this sort of style. Again, you can see I'm building all of that sharpness and that sharp edge down the main part of the Buster Sword with these scratches and scrapes. And you can see that it doesn't matter about it all being freehand. That is what is adding to the character, so don't worry too much about that. You could tell that I've had a lot of fun painting this model. It did take a while. It's not a quick and simple tutorial today, I'm sorry, but it is a tutorial that does add a lot of really cool different things. Like I say, from the Super Saiyan style hair to these scratches and scrapes and non-metallic metals on this big Buster Sword, to building up that vibrancy on the purples and with the light source. It's worth painting something like this. It's a really cool escape from the norm and painting the same type of models all the time. So again, as you can see, just using that stippling effect with a nice thin paint, and it really is starting to pay dividends now. It's really starting to stand out. It's really starting to make some of the light sources really look amazing. It's really starting to pop on these non-metallics just across the top here as well. It's cool because as we're building these layers up, sort of building towards what we want the really extreme sort of highlight to look like. Because by the time we get to the silver grey and the real white edge towards the end, this is really going to stand out. So as I say, with this silver grey, we're going to mix this Miskatonic Grey and silver grey. Like I said, I'm adding so many layers to this, but it's purely because I wanted to get this non-metallic metal sort of set up looking really great. I didn't want to do this sort of like half-assed. I wanted to kind of really do this justice. So again, I'm being a lot more specific about where I'm placing this now. The silver grey is a fantastic colour for anything non-metallic metal. It is always the layer that makes everything pop. It is so good for steels and these sorts of tones and colours. It always makes everything stand out. It's a great colour. So as you can see, I'm just using the Miskatonic Grey and the silver grey together, and I'm going to go around and do the same sort of thing again, just building that highlight towards this Buster Sword, because we really want the top edge to look sharp and worn and the bottom edge to be the dark sort of steely blue kind of colour as well. Like I said, it's a bit of a long process with this one, but it's worth it. It'll look great in the end. So you guys will have to let me know as well if this is your favourite character from Final Fantasy VII. So if you've played the game, if you like the game, and if you're here to watch just because you love the character, is this your favourite character, or do you have another favourite character in the Final Fantasy series? Because there are loads and loads of great characters from all the different great games out there as well. Like I said, my friend Chris, this is his absolute favourite. This is the first character from the first proper game that he played when we were younger, and it's always stuck. He just loves the Buster Sword. So yeah, you guys let me know which one is your favourite as well. As you can see, I'm just trying to be as careful as possible now. So again, using a little bit, just picking out some of the very extreme edges with this layer. And for the final layer, we're going to go with just white. Now you can use any white if you want, but the AK Interactive white is part of their intense range. And their intense range, what that means is this is a very, very vibrant white. If you're going to use a vallejo white instead, I would probably go with one of the game effects ones, like the rotten white, which is a really, really, really vibrant white. It's a fantastic color as well. And as you can see now, I'm just being very, very specific about where I place this one, because this is now going to be the very extreme, almost like edge highlight to the non-metallics. So as you can see, I'm just painting around the very, very, very edges that I want. So just across the top area where the light source is. And now I'm going to pick out the very sharp edge detail to the sword as well. What I'm going to do with this is just run the side of the brush along the side of the sword, as you can see, just to give me a little bit more control as to how much of the paint and where the paint actually sits on the model, just like so. Using the tip of your brush right across the edge of a sword sometimes can be a recipe for disaster. And then again, you can always add some of these really bright little scratches as well and scrapes. And then we're just going to pick out those very, very extreme edges where we think the light is catching on the pauldron and on the wrist guards as well. You can really see how much those wrist guards are popping already. And I mean, they haven't had the white on the front yet. So yeah, this is a really cool technique. This is a really cool way of painting. And as I said, it may be quite a long way of painting, but it is so, so worth it, because by the time you get to the end, it looks incredible. So again, just picking out those very, very, very extreme edges, just to make sure that they really, really pop on the model as well. Just like so. So what we're going to do from here is we're just going to add a little bit more blue into that steel. Not blue steel, we're just going to add a little bit more blue color into it to make it look a little bit steely. So we're going to use ocean blue. We're going to water this down to a very, very, very thin layer again. So we're going to use this as a glaze, and we're just going to stipple this glaze into the sort of bottom area of the sword, but we're also going to stick more towards the top end of the sword than we are down towards the tip of the sword. And again, this is creating that creative depth, that level of color and tone from the top end down to the bottom end, and that is giving us that cool texture and creating that temperature in the model as well, which is a really cool easy to do technique. You'd think, looking at the model, that you've spent ages doing it and it's really difficult to do, but it's actually not that tough to make it look that way. So it's just really cool little technique. Now, using the silver grey again, we're going to use the silver grey using a very thin down layer. So again, we're going to go back to using the glaze. So we've thinned this down really, really thin, and again, I'm just adding this across the blade, not all the way, just more towards the tip, just as you can see, and that's just creating the element that the light is really, really catching on that tip as well. So it's just giving that real vibrance boost just towards the very tip of the model, and because it's a very, very thin down glaze, we are still going to be able to see some of those sharp edges that we've painted underneath as well. All in all, my friends, that is Cloud painted. Like I said, my friend sent me this because it's his favourite character and wanted to see me paint it. So this one has been a really fun little project for me. Not just because it's a character that I love, but also because it is something that's been suggested by someone that is a really close friend to me. So it's a really good little commission piece. I hope, all in all, that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that some of the techniques haven't been too long-winded. I hope that you've really enjoyed and learned something new. And yeah, you'll have to let me know in the comments below what you think of the painting, whether I've done the character justice, if you love the character, and things like that. As always, all my friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your comments. I can't thank you enough. I don't have time at the end of videos to thank you. I'll have to make a video just to thank you all. So you take care of yourselves, my friends, and I will see you guys on the next one.